He's Hollywood's hottest hard man. But cross Mel Gibson, and you're not merely severed, you're interred. Gibson is famous behind the scenes for one thing: total control. Betray that trust, and he won't just drop you. He'll ensure you never return. From violent war epics, such as Braveheart and Hacksaw Ridge, to divisive dramas, such as The Passion of the Christ, Gibson's sets require allegiance, obedience, and complete investment. When he's challenged by someone, be it an actor, a writer, or a co-actor, he doesn't forget. He doesn't merely hold a grudge. He makes them into lifelong exiles. He has collaborated with legends such as Heath Ledger, Robert Downey Jr., Danny Glover, and Jim Caviezel. But not everyone escaped his sphere of influence alive. Here are 6 actors Mel Gibson completely shut out, and why he never looked back. Jason Isaacs portrayed Colonel Tavington in The Patriot opposite Mel Gibson, their hot-blooded feud fueling one of the film's ugliest dynamics. Professionally, on set it was okay. Gibson's intensity powered the performance, and Isaacs admired it. But years afterward, following Gibson's notorious onstage meltdown in 2006, times had shifted. At a fundraiser, Isaacs had a face-to-face confrontation with him, meeting him with a biting quip. "Rabbi Gibson, how are we?" It wasn't a joke. It was a statement. In an interview afterward, Isaacs said, "He's not my friend. Perhaps to my everlasting shame, I forgave him on the spot because he exposed himself." That one sentence was a curious blend of forgiveness and rejection. Isaacs forgave, but did not reconnect. He confessed they still sent the occasional text message, but there was no friendship, only courtesy. Isaacs has never collaborated with Gibson again since then. No cameos, no reunions, no nostalgic red carpet. Gibson returned to directing, but Isaacs kept his distance. It was not a publicized breakup. It was a single moment that ended a chapter in silence. In Hollywood, a quiet exile communicates more than scandal. Rob Schneider, who is famous for being the goofy comic relief, caught everyone off guard when he made a strong public stand against Gibson in 2006. Rather than a joke or a stand-up, Schneider employed an open letter in Variety. In bold, direct words he stated, "I, Rob Schneider, a half-Jew, solemnly vow from this day forward to never work with Mel Gibson. Even if Mr. Gibson offered me the starring role in Passion of the Christ too, I would have to decline." It was blunt, public, and personal. Hollywood typically doesn't go in for direct confrontation, but Schneider upended the rules. He didn't coyly dance around things. He didn't water it down. He spelled it out. There'd never be a return or reunion. At about the same time, Gibson was scheduled for a cameo in The Hangover Part 2, but cast members, including Zach Galifianakis, reportedly protested. Days later, the cameo was canceled. Officially, the studio cited creative differences. Unofficially, everybody knew what was going on. Gibson was radioactive, and actors were not stepping up to stand next to him. Schneider was one of the most vociferous voices arguing that line be made permanent. To this day, he has not mellowed. He's doubled down in interviews, quipping that some directors' calls should just go to voicemail. He didn't have to mention Gibson's name. Everyone already knew. And then there's Danny Glover. For years, he and Gibson were on-screen companions. Lethal Weapon wasn't a buddy cop film. It was a cultural icon. Their chemistry launched the franchise into success, and people felt the connection was genuine. And it was for a while. Off the set, they were pals. But as Gibson's public reputation started to crumble in the 2000s, Glover gradually withdrew. He never tore into Gibson in public. He never made vicious remarks. Rather, he merely retreated. They stopped appearing together. Glover stopped name-dropping him in interviews. And when Lethal Weapon 5 discussion surfaced, Glover kept his distance, saying only, "We'll see what happens." That wasn't excitement. That was hesitation. Later, when asked if he and Gibson still spoke, Glover admitted, "Not really." No bitterness, no drama, just distance. Gibson, on his part, has at some point owned up to Glover, being among the few who stood by him in his lowest moments. Even that, though, sounded like past tense, like a friendship stuck in memory. What makes this clash potent is how quiet it was. There was no brawl, no scandal, only silence. In Hollywood, Some of the loudest conclusions don't hit the headlines. They occur in the arena, where two individuals refuse to answer the phone and just allow history to decide. Mel Gibson and Jim Caviezel made history as a team. The Passion of the Christ became a hit, one of the most spoken about, infamous, and money-making R-rated movies ever released. Caviezel, who played Jesus, delivered a raw, brutal performance that left a permanent mark on his career, though not entirely in a good way. Before filming began, Gibson reportedly warned him, "You'll never work in this town again." It wasn't a joke. It was a warning, and it turned out to be true. After The Passion, Caviezel's mainstream career stalled. Offers dried up, big studios stayed away, and while Caviezel never wavered in defending the role, the cost to him was high. Adding insult was the fact that Gibson never even provided him with lifelines. Gibson went on to direct movies like Apocalypto, Hacksaw Ridge, and Get the Gringo, while Caviezel was completely absent, no cameos, no joint ventures, nothing. Caviezel later admitted, "My silence was my fault," alluding to missed opportunities and misunderstandings between them. He added, "I love Mel Gibson. I'd work with him again in a heartbeat." But the call never came. Even when talk of the Passion sequel, The Resurrection, surfaced, Gibson stayed quiet about casting. Caviezel said he was involved, but production dragged for years. It wasn't delays, although there were plenty of those. It was a sign of how convoluted their relationship had grown. It wasn't hate. It wasn't a feud. It was something more frigid, disconnect. Gibson cast Caviezel with his most memorable role, then abandoned him. In Hollywood, where loyalty and favors can make or break a career, that sort of silence means something. Joe Eszterhas was not simply any screenwriter. He was one of the most incendiary voices in Hollywood, responsible for Basic Instinct and Showgirls. So when Mel Gibson hired him to write a biblical epic on Jewish warrior Judah Maccabee, it was big news. Warner Brothers was financing it. Gibson was going to direct it, and Eszterhas had the script in his hands. But then came a creative meltdown. Months into development, Eszterhas turned in a draft that Gibson despised. The project fell into limbo, and then Gibson dropped out altogether, leaving the production for dead. That's when Eszterhas went nuclear. In a publicized letter, he personally accused Gibson, "You were never really interested in making a film about the Maccabees. The reason you won't make it is the ugliest possible one. You hate Jews." It was personal, explosive, and unclimbable. Gibson shot back, calling the script second-rate and that Eszterhas was manufacturing drama to write a book. But the harm was done. Warner Brothers abandoned the project. The film was dead on paper, and Eszterhas went on to write a memoir called Heaven and Mel, chronicling explosive fights, tapes, and outlandish allegations of Gibson's conduct. Whether all of these stories were true or not, one truth was clear. Gibson would never collaborate with him again. This wasn't a discreet falling out. It was one of the ugliest artistic breakups in recent Hollywood history. What might have been a career-making project became a war of words in public. And for a man as controlling as Gibson, that level of betrayal is not acceptable. Sometimes it only takes that one instant, though, to ruin everything. For Winona Ryder, it was at a Hollywood party in the mid-90s. She was already a star, Heathers, Edward Scissorhands, Reality Bites, while Gibson had just done Braveheart, one of the biggest films in the business. But Gibson made remarks at the party Ryder never forgot. In a later interview, she remembered, "We were at a party, and there were lots of people there. And he said to my gay friend, 'Oh, wait, am I going to get AIDS?' And then I said to him that I was Jewish, and he said, 'You're not an oven dodger, are you?' There was no argument, no revenge. Ryder just shut down and walked away. She never worked with Gibson, never even auditioned for him, never gave it the consideration. Years later, when she was asked whether or not she forgave him, Ryder replied, 'I think he's just who he is.' It wasn't anger. It was disappointment in the guise of acceptance. Gibson denied the remarks as lies and part of a smear campaign, but Ryder remained adamant. She explained that she hadn't spoken out previously because she wasn't seeking drama but truth. And that truth produced one of Hollywood's chilliest splits. Ryder never caused a scene, she simply recalled. And recalling was sufficient to guarantee that her name and Gibson's would never appear together on a credit. Fallouts in Hollywood don't necessarily include fireworks. Sometimes they are silent, with silence that lasts decades. That's how Mel Gibson works. He is fiercely devoted, but once the second trust is lost, he doesn't debate, just shuts down. The same zeal with which he puts everything into his movies, he expects from everyone around him. That's why some of his actors truly blossom under his vision. Andrew Garfield, Vince Vaughn, even Jim Caviezel, if he ever receives that second call. But for others, a single misstep, a single betrayal, or a single conversation is all it takes. Undefined. With Gibson, everybody gets one shot. No second takes.